Imagine holding a warm loaf of bread in your hands, its crisp crust crackling as you break it apart. It feels so ordinary that few of us ever stop to wonder where it truly began. Yet over 14,000 years ago, there were no farms, no wheat fields, and no villages. Only scattered bands of hunter-gatherers surrounded by wild grasses with tiny, bitter seeds as hard as stone. Why would anyone spend hours collecting, grinding, and baking something so difficult to eat? The answer is astonishing. That simple decision didn't just create bread. It sparked agriculture, reshaped human society, and laid the foundation for civilization itself. For generations, historians believed the story was simple. First, humans invented agriculture. Then they settled into permanent villages. And only after that did they begin baking bread. It seemed like the obvious sequence, until archaeology revealed something no one expected. In the black volcanic desert of northeastern Jordan lies a small archaeological site known as Shubaika 1. At first glance, it looks like little more than scattered stones in an empty landscape. But in 2018, researchers examining ancient fireplaces uncovered 24 tiny, charred fragments unlike anything they had seen before. Under a scanning electron microscope, the burnt pieces revealed a porous structure identical to modern flatbread. Radiocarbon dating delivered the real surprise. The bread was approximately 14,400 years old, around 4,000 years older than the earliest known evidence of farming. The people who baked it were not farmers. They owned no fields, planted no crops, and lived as hunter-gatherers, following seasonal migrations across the landscape. Yet, they had already mastered the complex process of gathering wild barley, einkorn, wheat, oats, and even the tubers of wetland plants, grinding them into flour, mixing the ingredients with water, and baking them over open fires. Suddenly, the timeline of civilization was turned upside down. Perhaps agriculture did not create bread. Perhaps the desire for bread created agriculture. But this discovery raises an even bigger question. Why would hunter-gatherers invest so much time and energy into making bread when they could simply eat meat, berries, or roots? The answer lies deep inside a grain of wild wheat. To us, a grain looks small and harmless. In reality, it is an incredibly well-designed biological vault. Its starch is locked inside tightly packed crystalline structures, protected by tough outer layers that resist digestion. Eat the grain raw, and your body extracts surprisingly little energy from it. Everything changes when humans intervene. Grinding the grain shatters its protective shell. Mixing it with water prepares the starch for transformation. Then, as heat rises from the fire, the starch gelatinizes, breaking apart into a form our digestive system can absorb far more efficiently. Instead of struggling to unlock calories, the body receives an instant source of usable energy. Researchers estimate that grinding and baking grains can increase the energy humans obtain by more than 50% compared with consuming whole cooked grains. That extra energy mattered enormously. As human brains expanded through evolution, they demanded extraordinary amounts of fuel, while our digestive systems became smaller and less capable of processing raw plants. Bread became more than food. It became a technology. Long before the first wheel or the first metal tool, it was already helping humans overcome one of biology's greatest limitations. Thousands of years later, another remarkable breakthrough happened, quite possibly by accident. Imagine an Egyptian baker mixing flour and water before being called away. The dough sits in the warm air for hours, unnoticed. Invisible wild yeast drifting through the atmosphere settles onto its surface. As the microorganisms consume natural sugars, they release tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide. By the time the dough reaches the oven, something extraordinary happens. Instead of baking into a dense, flat cake, it rises into a soft, airy loaf. Whether this moment happened exactly that way, no one can say for certain. But by around 4000 BC, the ancient Egyptians had mastered the art of leavened bread. What began as a fortunate discovery quickly evolved into an industry. Bakers experimented with recipes, creating dozens of varieties flavored with dates, figs, honey, and herbs. Massive clay ovens produced bread on a scale never seen before, while nearby breweries transformed coarse loaves into beer through fermentation. Bread and beer became two halves of the same production system. Soon, bread became far more than a meal. It became wages. Workers who built the pyramids of Giza were often paid in daily rations of bread and beer rather than precious metals. An empire was not sustained by gold alone. It was sustained by the simple loaf that fed every hand shaping the stones. But every loaf came with a cost, one that was written not on paper, but in human bones. Before mills, engines, or water wheels, every handful of flour had to be produced entirely by hand. Imagine kneeling on the hard ground before sunrise, gripping a heavy, grinding stone, pushing it back and forth for hours without rest, day after day, year after year. Now, here's something I'd like you to think about. The next time you slice a piece of bread, ask yourself this: how many hours of human labor would it have taken 8,000 years ago to make that single loaf? Archaeologists found the answer in the skeletons of ancient women from Abu Huraira, Syria. Their bones tell a heartbreaking story. Their big toes were permanently deformed from kneeling. Their lower spines showed severe compression. Their shoulder and arm bones had become unusually thick, comparable to those of modern elite rowers. Bread nourished entire communities, but it was often ground from the relentless physical labor of generations of women. Then, technology changed everything. The invention of the rotary quern dramatically reduced the effort required to grind grain. Centuries later, the Romans pushed innovation even further. At Barbegal in southern France, 16 enormous water wheels powered one of history's first industrial flour mills, producing tons of flour every day. For the first time in thousands of years, machines, not muscles, began making bread. As bread became easier to produce, it also became something far more powerful than food. It became a political weapon. The rulers of ancient Rome understood a simple truth: keep people fed, and you keep the peace. Their famous phrase, panem et circenses, bread and circuses, was more than a slogan. It was a strategy for survival. Every month, hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens received free grain from the state. As long as bread remained affordable, the empire remained stable. But what happens when the bread disappears? History gives us a chilling answer. By the late 18th century, ordinary French families were spending nearly 90% of their income just to buy bread. Then poor harvests drove prices even higher. Bakers' shelves emptied. Children went hungry. Mothers stood in endless lines, hoping for a loaf that never came. Imagine being in their place. Would you stay silent, or would you march? In October 1789, thousands of women did exactly that. They walked nearly 13 miles from Paris to Versailles, demanding one thing above all else: bread. Their march became one of the defining moments of the French Revolution. From ancient Rome to revolutionary France, one lesson echoes across history. Empires were not held together by swords alone. They survived because people had enough to eat. And when bread disappeared, so did political stability. Tomorrow morning, when you hold a slice of bread, remember, you are holding far more than food. You are holding 14,000 years of human curiosity, innovation, sacrifice, and survival. From wild grasses gathered by hunter-gatherers to the factories that feed billions today, bread has quietly shaped our world. So here's one final question. Did humans create bread, or did bread create civilization? The answer may be far more connected than we ever imagined.